Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. Continuing our discussion on the theme of Ishvara Pranidhana, today we will continue with Sutras 27 and 29. Very quickly, we are now currently discussing the section on Ishvara, where Patanjali says that by surrendering unto the Lord, one's ease of Samadhi enhances tremendously. And in the previous session, we saw how to relate with this concept of Ishvara. If you remember, we discussed Ishvara is that one person who's beyond time, who's beyond suffering and all worldliness, and he's the original teacher of all, the source of all omniscience. Right now, while we know so much about Ishvara, to realize him is a totally different level. So in this section today, we are going to see how we can actually realize this Ishvara, and finally, what is the effect, what is the result of Ishvara realization. So let's see Sutra number 27 now. This is how Patanjali says, Tasya vachaka pranavaha. Tasya, unto him, right? Vachaha, the way to address him, the designator, the expressive is pranava. Pranava is the sacred syllable Om, right? This is how the translation goes. The word expressive of Ishvara is the mystic sound Om or pranava. Now, some of you may be knowing that Om is a very, very special mantra in the Vedic culture. In fact, every Vedic activity has to begin with this Omkara. So what is so special about this Omkara or this Pranava has been described across multiple Vedic literatures. In fact, I'm going to present a very quick summary of some of the key points, beginning with Mandukya Upanishad. Now, this is a very special Upanishad because this entire Upanishad is only talking about this Omkara. And specifically, it talks about how the Om sound comprises of three syllables, A, U, and Ma. It is their combination which produces the sound Om. And each of those syllables have their own meanings, right? Now, for the Purusha to exist in this world of Prakriti, right, it needs to interact with Prakriti. And that interaction happens through consciousness. And that consciousness manifests at various levels. So right now, we are in a wakeful state of consciousness. In Sanskritam, it is called as Jagruta. So in this Jagruta state or wakeful state, it is Ishvara who's facilitating our interaction with this entire world. As much as the sun, through its light, is facilitating our day-to-day activities on this planet. Right? Literally, if there is no sunrise ever, then there can never be any activity. Sun is the source of all energy on this planet. Likewise, Ishvara, through his consciousness, facilitates the Purusha's interactions in this world. And that wakeful state of consciousness is represented by the syllable A. Then one may ask, what happens when one sleeps? Because technically I'm inactive, but am I really so? No, we understand that even during dreams, I am expressing my consciousness. So that second state of dream or swapna is represented by the syllable U. That is another level of consciousness. As you go deeper, beyond wakeful and dream, beyond Jagruta and Swapna, is a stage called a Shushupti, which is a state of deep sleep. Now, this is not ordinary sleep. This is like Yoga Nidra. This is like the yogic sleep, where one is not affected by the Rajogun of wakefulness or the Tamogun of dream, but rather this is a state of Sattva or goodness. That is what the Shushupti or deep sleep, that is represented by the syllable Ma. So this combination A, U, Ma is what that creates the Omkara. Of course, the Mandukya Upanishad also talks about the dot. If you see, look at the symbol of Om, there's a dot, which puts all of these sounds together, right? So that dot is represented as a fourth state, which is beyond wakeful dream and deep sleep. That is called as Turiya or the state of trance. That is what we experience, the state of Samadhi. That is the pure state, in which the Purusha can realize itself. Like that. So that is how Mandukya Upanishad is describing, that it is Ishvara's consciousness which is manifesting as as a support for the jiva in these three different states of being. Then in the Mundaka Upanishad, it is very nicely described that how for the living entity to operate in this world, for it to communicate in this world, again Ishvara facilitates by manifesting his potency as speech, mind, and breath. Right? How do these three things work? Right? Moment the mind thinks of something, through the channel of breath or prana, it translates into a physical action in the form of speech. So mind, breath, and speech together, they form a combination, and that is also represented by the syllables a, u, and ma accordingly. Right? Another reference which comes is from the Maitreya Upanishad. There are many references in that Maitreya Upanishad. It talks about how the three phases of time, right? Our existence in this world is on the foundation of time. So that three states of past, present, and future are represented by this a, u, and ma syllables respectively. In fact, that Upanishad also talks about how one's mother, father, and guru or teacher are also represented, because they are the ones who are giving us knowledge and awareness, right? That is also a manifestation of the mercy of Ishvara through our mother, through our father, through our gurus, right? Ishvara's blessings manifest, right? Even the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna actually explains it. Pitaham yasya jagata, mata dhata pitamaha. And I am the mother, I am the father, I am the grandsire. Interestingly, in that, Krishna also says, Pranava sarva vedeshu. He also explained that, I am that Pranava or that Omkara. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also talks about that, right? Then there is the Vayu Puran, which explains how the three divine forms, the divine trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh are also represented by the three syllables A, U, and Ma. A representing Brahma, who is the cosmic creator. U represents Vishnu, who is the maintainer. And Ma represents Lord Shiva, who is the cosmic destroyer. In the Shakta traditions, these three divine personalities corresponding feminine counterparts are also represented by these A, U, and Ma syllables. A represents Mahasaraswati, who is the divine feminine potency who provides knowledge of creation. U represents Mahalakshmi, who is a divine feminine counterpart who maintains this creation, right? And Ma represents Kali, Mahakali, who is the divine feminine destructive potency of Lord Shiva, who gets activated at the time of cosmic annihilation. So you can see how this one Omkara has been hailed across the Vedic literatures. Literally, this Omkara is a direct representation of the Supreme Lord. Right? Now, a question may come, if indeed tasya vachaka pranavaha, if indeed this Pranav mantra is what that one needs to, or this Om is what one needs to connect to the Ishvara, then the question that comes is, isn't Om also ultimately some sound, and isn't that also a vritti? Because we are trying to, if you remember the way we described vrittis, where anything that creates an impression is a vritti. So isn't reciting Om also a chitta vritti, right? So, or to put it in a more simple language, isn't Om also a sound, and sound also is matter? Sound belongs to this world. So isn't this sound also material? So to understand this, the Rig Veda very beautifully explains this concept of 4 levels of sound. See, sound as we understand is not just this physical sound. Right now you heard some physical sound, but there is only one component of sound, that is called as Vaikari, or the physical or external form of sound. But encoded within that sound are also feelings, right? When your near and dear ones, when they talk to you, you don't just hear words, but you actually hear their feelings. That is called Madhyama. That is that's a deeper level of sound, which is carried inside that layer of the physical sound. So physical sound, if it's the most external representation, encoded within that, right? Like how there's a letter inside an envelope, right? So like that, the emotional sound or Madhyama sound is there inside the physical sound, right? But then deeper than the emotional sound is the intellectual sound, right? Because beyond emotions, like when you're listening to a class like this, right? When you're reading, something that is like something conceptual, right? It goes past your physical and mental layers and affects you directly at an intellectual layer. So that sound is called as Pashyanti. Pashyanti, the Sanskritam word, literally means that which reveals, to see things, right? That is intellectual sound. So when you see this intellectual sound, or when you hear this intellectual sound, your worldview changes, your perspective to life changes, right? You have one of those aha moments, and you learn to see reality from a different vision. This Pashyanti is actually the impetus for action. Think of this sound to be like an idea, right? Because what is an idea? Idea is also a thought, right? And feeling may also seem like something happening in your mental space, but there is still a difference, right? So like that, these three layers, physical, emotional, intellectual layers, right? These are three subtler layers of sound. But beyond this Pashyanti lies a spiritual layer of sound called as para. Para literally means transcendental, that which transcends, beyond. Para literally means beyond. So the question comes, beyond what? Beyond matter. So the spiritual sound is also encoded within these other three layers of sound. And the Omkara sound, the syllable Om, actually is operating at this level. Not just Om, actually, literally every divine name of the Lord operates at this para level. And that is why interacting with these divine sounds, these divine mantras, sacred chants, is such a powerful process, that practice that you see across world traditions, not just in the Vedic tradition, but across the world traditions. You will see every world tradition has some or the other form of sacred chants, sacred prayers, because they are trying to tune into that spiritual level of sound which is beyond all matter. Because for the Purusha to rise beyond matter, it needs support of something beyond matter, something spiritual. And that spiritual support is provided by this para sound, of which Omkara is such a powerful representation. And therefore, in the next sutra, Patanjali says that what should I do with this sacred sounds, sacred chants? He says, Tajjapas tatartha bhavananam. He says that Omkara, japa. Japa is a sacred Vedic practice of repetitively chanting certain mantras, certain sacred sounds, sacred chants, right? That japaha, but then it is not just some blind mechanical chanting, blind mechanical repetition or production of sound, but rather it is that artha bhavanam, meaning that one has to reflect on the meaning of those sacred chants. So when you are reciting the Omkara, understand, I'm not just indulging in the process of producing sound, but rather I'm actually hearing that sounds, these sacred chants, and I'm trying to absorb in the meaning, right? And that is what makes this whole process so potent. That's how the translation goes. It has to be repeated constantly with feeling, realizing its full meaning, which means you have to invest your heart into this process of japa if you really want to realize Ishvara, right? While in the previous case, in the previous section, we saw this is just some information, some intellectual information to relate with the concept of Ishvara, a logical understanding of Ishvara, right? But realization of Ishvara is beyond our logical understanding. It is something that has to, dawn upon us. And how does it happen? By this process of japa, by constant repeated chanting with feeling and meditating on the meaning of Ishvara, like that. So this is a very, very powerful practice, right? Certain commentators, they explain that how, just like how when you take a ball of iron and put it in fire, that iron ball, because of contact with fire, it becomes red hot like fire. In fact, practically you cannot differentiate between fire and that red hot iron ball. So just like how fire gives heat and light, that red hot iron ball also starts giving heat and light. Practically there's no difference. And what is transforming that iron into fire is the contact of iron with fire. Likewise, when the Purusha, when we invest our consciousness, invest our feelings, invest our heart in coming in contact with Ishvara through this process of repeated chanting, not one time, not two times, but repeated continuous chanting for a prolonged period of time, right? Then what happens? Then even our consciousness gets spiritualized. So right now we are so absorbed in matter, right? But to come out of that absorption from matter, this process of japa or chanting is such a powerful process. And what happens if one does that? He says, tataha pritak chetana. So then that the inner chetana here means that inner consciousness, the inner self, adhigama. Adhigama means one is realized. It comes forward, right? So tataha pratak chetana adhigama, then antaraya abhava. Antaraya means interruptions, obstacles, right? Some discontinuities, right? Basically challenges and obstacles. Abhava means they disappear, right? So which means by this practice of Ishvara Pranidhana, what happens? Simultaneously dawns realization of the inner self, and all obstacles disappear. All obstacles in our journey towards attaining Samadhi, they disappear. Right? Let us recite this particular sutra. Tatah pritak chetanadhigamopyantaraya abhavascha. Right? So what exactly is he talking about here? That how realization of inner self, realization of Ishvara, and removal of obstacles. These three things are actually not different from each other. They are not three different stages. Another metaphor that is given in the Vedic literature is, every time you eat, three things are happening. One, right? Tushti. Tushti in Sanskritam, it means you get satisfied. You delight with the taste of food and you're very happy and you're satisfied. Tushti happens. Then pushti. Pushti means nutrition. Your body gets nourished every time you eat food, right? And then finally, kshud apaya. Kshud apaya means cessation of hunger. Your hunger also goes away. So you see, three things are happening with just one process. You get satisfied, you get nourished, and your hunger is also satisfied. You don't have to do three different things, but just one process of eating facilitates all these three. Likewise, just that one process of Ishvara Pranidhana, it does all these three things. One, you will realize Ishvara. Two, you will realize your own self. And three, the obstacles which are there in the process of attaining Samadhi, they get eliminated. So that's a very, very powerful ending, the result of Ishvara Pranidhana that Patanjali talks about in the end of this particular section, right? He begins the next section by explaining what are those obstacles, what are those challenges, a very, very practical and relevant section for all of us, because sometimes we don't even know that we are facing obstacles. So Patanjali is going to highlight to us what are those challenges that every aspiring seeker in this journey of spirituality and yoga is going to face, right? So we'll conclude by very quickly summarizing what we discussed today. One, we discussed that how Tasya Vacha Pranavaha, that this Ishvara is represented by the sacred syllable Om, which is a combination of three syllables, A, U, and Ma. And then we saw that how to realize that Tat Japa Artha Bhavana, by chanting Ishvara's names alone, he can be realized. That's the way to, it's not just about theoretically knowing things, but we need to do that practice of repeated chanting, right? And finally, by realizing Ishvara, one can also realize oneself, right? Self-realization is included in Ishvara realization, right? So this is the understanding that Patanjali gives at the end of this particular section. So see you all in our next session, where we are going to discuss what are the challenges and obstacles a yogi faces in their spiritual journey. See you all very soon. Hare Krishna.